Good morning. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus shows that people don't know the scriptures as well as they think they do. And in many cases, they've actually got the wrong end of the stick so far as the interpretation's concerned. Let's take this scripture as an example. It's from Matthew chapter 5, verse 33. Jesus said, "Again, you have heard that it's been said by them of old time, you shall not forswear yourself, but shall perform unto the Lord your oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it's God's throne, nor by the earth, for it's his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great King, neither shall you swear by your head, because you can't make one hair white or black. But let your communication be, yes, yes, no, no. For whatsoever is more than these comes of evil." Jesus says that phrase, "you have heard," 6 times, stressing this is what man thinks God said. You know, without the heart and spirit of the law, all we have is just a tradition or an old saying. Why would someone want to swear on oath anyway? Well, it could be they want to give themselves a rod for their back because they're weak. The problem with this is that if they're weak-willed, they're just propping up a weakness instead of dealing with it. Another reason may be that they're trying to convince someone of their integrity and sincerity, giving the impression that they're honest and reliable. Actually, people who habitually back up their words with promises usually give exactly the opposite impression and arouse suspicion. Straight, honest words like yes or no are far more likely to convince. There's also another reason, which is they want to deliberately deceive others. The very thing which is supposed to safeguard the truth can be used to deceive and propagate lies. Many false cults and secret societies take oaths upon initiation. The Mormons and the Masons are 2 examples. These oaths bind people, holding them, by fear, from ever betraying the secrets of the cult or society. The occult is full of oaths and initiation rites. This isn't God's way. It's strange that God asks us to make no promises when we become believers. All he asks us to do is believe his promises to us. By making an oath, we're coming out of Christian freedom and putting ourselves back under the letter of the law, putting a false confidence in our ability to tell the absolute truth. Jesus doesn't want us to trap ourselves, because if we fail to keep our oaths, we fall into condemnation. I know nobody's perfect, but I personally can get quite hurt when someone promises to do something for me or with me, and they don't keep their word. When people fail to do what they say, I feel terribly let down. My brother reminded me some years ago of how I used to be as a child. Sometimes my mum was short of money. She couldn't afford to give us pocket money. And she'd say that she'd give me double next week. Well, because I took her word as gospel truth, I wouldn't let her forget. I'd add up all the weeks she'd missed and try my best to get her to pay her bill. But to be fair, this was probably because honesty was something my parents taught me to be scrupulous about. I found it terribly difficult to lie and would blush even when telling a half-truth. And I could never say sorry unless I genuinely and in all honesty felt that it really was my fault. And I'd never make a promise if there was the slightest hint I couldn't keep it. That's why I could never promise to be good. I was very grateful of the fact I was born British, because at one time our laws were based on biblical principles which followed quite closely the 10 Commandments. And Christianity was the basis for our education in schools. The principles I grew up with, like an Englishman's home is his castle and an Englishman's word is his bond, sounded like real ideals to me. And to be honest, I'm really appalled at the decline in our national standards since my childhood. It's classed as utter foolishness nowadays in Britain to trust people without having first proved their reliability. When Maurice and I travel around the churches to minister, we take a selection of books and videos and CDs to sell. Years ago, people would offer to pay by cheque, and after filling in the front of the cheque, they'd often ask if we'd like to see their banker's card and note their account number on the reverse side to ensure payment. But I always refused, just on principle. Sometimes people said they'd really love to purchase our material but had come financially unprepared. I always told these people to take whatever they wanted and send a cheque on to us later. Often they'd offer to give me a note of their name and address, but as we had no intention of running after their payment, this just seemed a pointless exercise. Besides, it proved to us and them whether or not they truly were Christians. Because Jesus tells us not to swear at all and just to let our yes be yes and our no be no, I think in actual fact he's just telling us to learn to have integrity. On many occasions in the past, I've determined in my mind to do something and for a time done really well. But because I was afraid my will would weaken, I've told someone just to give me a rod for my back in the hope that this would strengthen my resolve. But how rotten I've felt when my weak will has been exposed, not only to myself, but also to the person I told, because I couldn't carry through what I'd originally purposed to do. I've seen it in others too. I once knew a godly woman who told me that God had told her to grow her hair long. She was elderly and had difficulty looking after her hair anyway, but she said that this was what God had specifically told her to do. Well, about 8 months later, when her hair became too difficult for her to manage, she had to cut it short. But it left me with real questions about whether or not she'd heard God in the first place. And if she had, then how could she possibly rebel against something he told her to do? Another couple I knew for years had said that God had told them to trust him and not use contraception. But after having 4 children and then 2 accidental ones, they decided to call it a day and make sure that they had no more. You know, it takes real faith to be convinced that God knows what's best for us. In the past, I've sometimes been impressed to fast for something and started to put my thoughts into action. But once I mention my intention to someone else, it seems that my resolve is weakened and I lose all willpower to carry out what I'd purposed in my heart to do. This doesn't only seem to happen when we're trying to do something godly either. I hadn't seen one of my friends for quite a while, and when I did, I commented on how well she looks after losing some weight. She was really pleased with the compliment and told me she was counting calories, and even though she still had a few more stones to lose, she'd done exceptionally well so far and felt confident that she'd at last achieve her goal. Well, the next time I spoke to her on the phone, I asked how her dieting was going. She said that it had all gone to pot. I'd been the first person she'd told about her calorie counting, but after she'd told me, everything seemed to go wrong. You know, we're not all made the same way. On the one hand, there are people who have a problem keeping the word, so their promises are empty and worthless. These people can often make rash promises and bring terrible consequences upon themselves if their promise is taken seriously by the person they've made it to. Esau promised Jacob his birthright because at one particular point in his life, he was famished and just needed food. And he needed it now. But because Jacob stubbornly refused to let go of the promise, which he knew he'd unfairly forced his brother to make, Esau lost everything that was important and valuable to him. On the other hand, there are those wired the other way and would keep their word or their promise no matter how rash or foolish it may be. Jephthah promised God that he'd sacrifice the first thing that came from his house to greet him after his victory in battle, and was grief-stricken when his daughter, his only child, proved to be the one he had to sacrifice. It seems that keeping promises can get us into as many problems as not keeping them, if they're made without much consideration and deliberation. But I can't help but think that Jephthah had been on the safer side, especially as he was actually mentioned in Hebrews 11, verse 32, as being part of that great cloud of witnesses for his faith. I honestly think that God's looking for people who can keep their own counsel and not tell their intentions to other people. For example, just look at Mary and think of how highly favoured she was to become the mother of Jesus. She was given the greatest of all honours to bear the Son of God himself. Yet when Joseph, her fiancé, found out she was pregnant, she didn't even tell him anything about the angel visitation until God had revealed it personally to him. The Bible records that she hid all these things in her heart and never mentioned any of the strange incidents that happened. Hence, we know so little about the childhood of Jesus. Jesus too was very closed about his mission on earth. The Bible records that he wouldn't give himself to anyone because he knew what was in the heart of men. It would be of far greater value to us personally if we could learn to have integrity and prove by our actions that we're trustworthy without making promises and oaths in an effort to impress people. If our word is not our bond and we can't live up to a simple yes or no, we just expose our lack of integrity and end up being viewed as good talkers with big ideas who shouldn't be believed or taken seriously. Well, that's something for us to think about this week. God bless you.